Hey, welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is Maureen, and I'm here with Jean Nunnally. I am really, really excited today, Jean, to be with you. We have a mutual friend, Zenith, who introduced us, and Zenith had this really bright light bulb come to her and say, like, "Oh, I think these two would be good together." And so, um, welcome to our space. We're going to talk about a lot of things. The topic, I always say, like, the topic is this, and then we'll uncover what else is meant to come up. But you are the author of a book called Success Without School, and really an expert within yourself and in your life in unschooling. But I just want to start there and say, there is so much to share today, but a big, hearty welcome to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I mean, I'm truly, truly honored to be a part of this podcast because it's amazing for me.
Thank you. I'm so happy. There's so many places we could start. And when I was sort of compiling notes and reading through the book, Success Without School, I'll just hold it up for those who are going to be watching on YouTube so they can see it, and we'll provide links later. But just this idea that, from what I can glean, you had a pretty traditional upbringing and sort of the way you were brought up, and going through college and getting a job after college. And it was pretty, what I'd say is traditional. And then for me, when I think of, we're going to look at a little bit the differences between homeschool and unschooling, but wow, like, to me, it's such this courageous embrace of a path for your children to take. And so maybe we'll start at, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your home life, and maybe even your school life as a youngster.
Right. So yeah, you're absolutely spot on. It was a very traditional, conventional sort of upbringing. Certainly my I had a wonderful home life, very stable, mom, dad, two older brothers, and very traditional schooling. Other than I started out at a very small, tiny little rural county school. And so my schools were fairly small, but again, very traditional. I was, the A student. I was the people pleaser, the teacher pleaser, the teacher's pet kind of thing. And really, I always thought of my education as being really good, and school being really good. And it kind of wasn't until I was unschooling my own kids that I started to see that there was a bit of a damage done to me by school. And I didn't, like I said, it took me a long time to realize that. For a long time, I would say, yes, I had a great school situation, but now I'm doing something different. And now I sort of realized that a lot of that school structure was creating the people pleaser that I grew into. And it's something that I'm still trying to unwind today. And I'm still stuck with being very much a people pleaser. And I know school's not the only influence on that, but it was a lot of an influence to try to be, you're set up to be only good if you do these things. That's what makes you worthy, is if you make these grades, is if you do these things. And you're not ever given the message that you're worthy just because of, just because.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because you're saying you had a good experience in school. You didn't feel particularly affected by it in many ways, and it led you to a big university and a big job after that.
Yeah.
And so that really wasn't the reason that you knew in the moment, the reason why you chose to go down the path of unschooling. That happened for you afterwards.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have terrible situation in school. Like I said, I was a good test taker, so I made good grades. Things came very easily to me. It was after I actually had kids and started to meet people who were doing things a little bit differently and seeing how their kids were. Well, a lot of it was at the beginning. People were talking about getting your kids into preschool at really what I felt like was a very, very young age. And motherhood was such an amazing time for me. It was such an amazing transformation. And I'm with my daughter, who's the older, and just loving being a mom. And suddenly I'm getting these messages that, well, you need to start looking for a preschool. And I thought, well, I'm not ready to give her up. I'm not ready to hand her over to some stranger for the better hours of the day. And that kind of threw me into a little bit of a panic. And that's when someone handed me a book about that was a compilation of different homeschooling methods or philosophies. And I read this one article by John Holt, who kind of became my guru. And it just totally resonated with me. And it made me realize, it just made me realize that's what I wanted for my kids. I wanted my kids to, it just seemed like the right thing. I don't know. I'm just guessing the universe was speaking to me in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
it was just very, very powerful. John Holt's the one that coined the term unschooling. And he's he was a champion of that methodology. Really a very amazing guy.
that's amazing. There's a lot right there. I want to talk about unschooling in a minute, but the first time I met you, when we had the conversation, it was striking to me that, to me, listening to your story, you were leaning into your intuition from a really young age, let's just say, or young place in your life. And we don't always know that intuition is the thing that's guiding us. And it's unique to us because the path that you have walked is unique to you. And so, but the story was around when you were a very young mom, and I believe breastfeeding, but you were around the other Leche mothers, and you saw like a way of being with their children that was super, like you're saying, when someone handed you the book, the John Holt book, is like you saw something in it that spoke to you, that made sense to
Absolutely.
you. And
Yep.
do you think of that as intuition, or do you now know that it may have been, or how did you follow? Because a lot of times we see things we like, but then our like cultured mind is the one that says, but that's not possible. That's not possible. It's not reasonable. It's kind of ridiculous, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, I think it is. I think it was intuition. I don't know that I would have called it that at the time or noticed it, but maybe I always had, I don't know, because I always grew up thinking that there were possibilities, that there wasn't anything that was impossible. And for some reason, I can't really tell you, because I did grow up in a very conventional sort of family. I don't know, the unconventional sort of appeals to me, and when things resonate with me, they're strong. The idea is strong. So I'm not sure.
You had a couple examples in the book too. The one, you had a story about when you were little, because what you're saying to me right now, I believe to be very true, is how you said it was just attractive to be unconventional. And I remember those parts of me that too, like when I was a young girl, there were things, that maybe a parent would say, and I'd rise up a little bit indignantly and think like, oh, that's not my truth. And isn't that interesting? Because we do have the beauty of, when we're born, and just our light and all those things. And then we get kind of pulled away from it, from school and from our family and whatever happens to us in life. But I can remember those times as a kid of being like, gosh, dang it, that's not my truth. And so I think you have a story about a project when you were a little girl, and just that it just didn't fit who you were at the time. It was constraining you and keeping you in a box in a way. I thought that was
Yeah.
an important.
I have, I think, very strong, like not specific instances, but many, many little instances of feeling dismissed as a child by adults, well-meaning, but adults that said, oh, you can't understand these things that we're talking about, or you shouldn't be in this conversation, because you're a child. And in my side, my brain, I was thinking, I I have all the capacity to have this conversation. I don't understand why you can't see that in me.
Mhm.
And so I think because I really remember that feeling of a very frustrating feeling. It's still a kind of a trigger for me if I feel I'm being dismissed by somebody unfairly. I didn't want my kids to feel that. It just felt so disrespectful. And so I think I always wanted to treat my children as though they came into this world existing as whole beings
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
as people that, granted, they don't have the experience yet. So the difference in our lives is, I would tell my kids, I'm not any smarter than you. Because I mean, how do you measure smartness? How do you measure IQ? The only thing I have is I have years of experience on you. That's my
Yeah.
only difference. And my experience is not necessarily going to be relevant for you because you have your own life to lead. You have your own path to go. So I can share my experience and you can choose to listen to it or not, but it's your life, you're living your life, not me. I'm here to help you, to facilitate, to guide you, but I'm not going to tell you. That is above my pay grade to tell you what you should be doing based on what I think, So yeah. So a
Oh,
lot of it was just that memory of feeling what it felt like to be dismissed as a child that drove me.
yeah, that was operating inside of you.
Mhm.
And I'm blown away because, when we got together, is a lot of what you speak about are the tenets of conscious parenting, that I studied in Dr. Shefali's Institute. They really are. Conscious parenting is seeing your child as that whole being, is taking away that hierarchical type of structure that is like, I know more than you, therefore you should listen to me and do all of my rules. And just a willingness to let your child be your guide, because what I'm
Mhm.
hearing you say too is you didn't go into this with any master plan of I am here to teach them.
Right.
It sounds like it was more, I want to empower them to be internally driven by what is guiding them.
Right.
Yeah.
We can
Mhm.
collaborate, we can
Mhm.
work together,
Yeah.
but yeah, I never wanted them to see me as, and that's why I really don't like the word teacher, because it has this connotation in our culture of I must impart to you something that's important. It's one thing if I go to someone, like if I come to you and say, Maureen, you have this information, will you teach me this?
Mhm.
Then I've given you permission,
Mhm.
okay? And I've requested teaching. But for you to say, Jean, you must know, you must learn what I have. And I say, well, I don't necessarily want that. That to me is it's bullying, kind of,
Mhm.
it's an we downplay it, but to me, a school situation is kind of a bullying situation where there's a teacher at the front of the room that's telling the kids what they need to do when they
Yeah.
haven't necessarily wanted that.
Yeah, so it's really an invitation to take a look at how conventional school is structured, which we know it's such a behemoth that
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's
I'm
so
not sure
big.
that will change,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I do like your messages though, because I think that, you know, for whatever a family chooses for their kids, the elements that this is why I think it's sometimes interesting. Like your book is called Success Without School: Unschooling My Children from Birth to College, but there's so much in this book that's valuable for everybody. So sometimes we can't be fooled by what the title of a book is. Yes, if that particular population wants to read this book, then this is for you, but I think there's so much more that's for everybody. And for me, like, looking at these ways that, well, how does my child feel? Like if they're in conventional school, how are they feeling if this is, if it's presented in a certain way, or even as a teacher, or, we can do things at home like, oh, I, as your parent, I consider your teacher, your guide, and just start to, so I think the conversation is so valuable for anyone on either side of the choice, I guess, because I think that one thing I was thinking about when I was reading the book was like how things can also I'm trying to jog my memory, is just like sometimes how, oh, I know what it was. that there can be the rightness or wrongness put on things, and that it's like this choice is good and this choice is not good kind of thing. But what I saw, and we can jump into the unschooling part of it, is where I'm not, I'm a listener today too, in that I don't know a lot about unschooling, and I'm fascinated by it. I feel like my projections onto unschooling have always been like, wow, those families are super brave, because I don't know if I could take that on. Yet I love this concept of really learning driven in from internally instead of the outside. You have to have these grades, you have to take these, ask anyone that I know locally, and just like standardized testing, I just never really vibed with it at all. And I don't think it's great. And when I would drop off my daughter for the SAT, and she would be just in complete tears, and just to see that fallout from it, that really does affect children deeply. And I don't know where I was going with that, but just the continuum. And I think it was around when you talk about that your kids were at home being unschooled, yet they would have play dates with kids who went to a traditional school, or they would have, play dates with kids who were homeschooled or unschooled. And so one of these misperceptions was that you don't have as rich of a social life if you're unschooled. So, I mean, we can start there with unschooling, but what are and what are your kind of hallmarks of the unschooling experience, or John Holtz, or whatever you want to share?
Well, definitely to your point about socialization, which is something that we get asked a lot. It's probably easy for people to think about it as you must be in a vacuum, maybe your kids don't see, because we're so used to the structure of school, a bunch of kids all together with one teacher at the front. And the idea of, you don't have that classroom setting. How do you meet people? But so yes, there was some intention on my part around trying to find a group of people, which I did. I was lucky we were in Houston, so we had a big city, lots of people around, and enough to find a little core group of families with kids roughly in that same age range, who all were interested in just playing or doing things. So we didn't all have the exact same educational philosophy, but we had very similar parenting philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like all of us were very respectful parents. We had similar values. And that was very important to me, because I wanted my kids around other kids who were happy and grounded and feeling good from that standpoint. Because I think what I've noticed is that when you're happy, you don't bully other people. You aren't mean, you aren't petty. That usually comes from a feeling of lack in a person themselves. So having people around that were all happy and on that same wavelength was really important to me. And yeah, there's no lack of activities for kids if you look. And if you don't find what you want, you make something happen, which isn't that hard either, especially because the nice thing about being homeschooled or unschooled is that you've got all these hours during the day when a lot of institutions or teachers, music teachers, museums, they're not busy and so they've got time, and they're happy to fill those hours especially with kids who are eager to learn. Because the kids that are, when you're doing something because you've chosen that activity, that's the thing that all the coaches and teachers that we dealt with were constantly saying about our group of kids. Gosh, everybody they're so happy, they're so enthusiastic, they're so nice to each other. And I said, well, that's because they want to be here, and they know that they don't have to be here. They could leave at any more. They've got control. They have agency to leave if they don't like it. And so, yeah, of course they're happy, because they're always doing something they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's a beautiful byproduct for kids to be able to experience the choice. As a mother, it's also, you take on a lot, And I imagine that looks like a lot of different ways. I think that you were able to stay home with your children. And so there's probably, do you see certain subsets of the population of unschoolers working? And then how does that work? Do guides come in and or rotating houses, or what does that look like?
Oh, good question. So yes, certainly I would say it's unusual for, let's say, working parents to unschool, but it's not impossible. And a lot of people do it. And here's the thing. So instead of thinking about, my kids need to be taught or they need to be in a learning environment, try to shift the paradigm to consider that your children are able to learn. They come wired into this life to learn. They started from the time they were babies, learning about their limbs, learning how to communicate, learning how to ambulate, how to get places. That doesn't stop when they are 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 or 8. They're always able to learn. So rather than think I have to be there teaching them, all they need is an environment that's safe to work in. So what some single moms even have done is they make sure their children are and when they're too young to be left on their own, that they're in a safe place where there are some resources for them to play. Because remember, we think of play as adults in our culture, we think of play as a bad thing, as a frivolous thing. But play is the work of children. It is how they're learning. They're trying things on. They try on ideas and emotions and all kinds of things, from physical block towers to, emotional ideas. And so that's what they need, is just an environment to play in for the years until they're able to really start to teach themselves. So in a way, a parent could theoretically never be with their kids very much. Maybe, never, but during the hours that they're home, they can read together, they can talk together, they can be together. And if the parent is trusting that the child is in a safe place and can learn on their own, that's really all that they need. And you're empowering your child to say, I'm able to do this. I'm capable of learning on my own. And then all you have to do as a parent is just provide some resources around. Those can be books, those could be internet, those could be other people, they could be teachers, they could be tutors, not necessarily, but so there's just so many different ways.
So would you say that would the way you structure it in your own home say, okay, roughly from this hour to this hour are our school hours. And so there would be that expectation for the kids.
Well, again, I didn't do it that way.
Mhm.
And look, we were just living life. Like, we would get up in the morning, they would do their thing, I would do my thing, we'd be in the house together. They had access to me all the time if they needed me, if they had a question, but I wasn't directing their play. And so the idea of school hours is, again, it's a paradigm that we're taking from the culture of school, saying that there should be. But if you look at human beings, sometimes my role model was more Jane, the cave woman. What would Jane do? It used to be what was in my head. Like, she didn't have school. She
Wow.
had a life. They
Mhm.
were living life. Okay. They were looking for food. They were finding, making shelter. They were enjoying nature. They were traveling. They were doing those things. So, that's the kind of model that I was thinking about for what are we doing? How are we playing? How are we interacting?
Mhm.
So it's just, we talked a lot, we did things, we were in the car together driving to
Yeah.
this thing or that, but it was very non-school-ish, hence the word unschooling.
Yeah, thanks for shedding light on that. And I love the just taking a look at a structure that's existed for a long time and just saying, curious about this? Does this work for our family? Do we want to do it a little bit different? I'm curious about your experience as you began to kind of step into getting curious about how these days were going to go, how you wanted your kids to learn. I'm sure that it gradually unfolded as the days and months and years went by. But did you see yourself looking at other parts of your life differently? Um, I don't know if that makes sense, but just like I feel like your path, the way you describe it, it's a lot of letting go of
Mm.
what you thought was right, what you thought, or you may not even have thought it was right, what you were told to do. And so you questioned a lot, like, does this work for me anymore? And did that become sort of a more of a life mantra is the
Oh,
question, I guess.
absolutely. Yes, it
Mhm.
did very much so. And I think I talk about it a little bit in the book, that there were some pillars that really fell for me. One of which was um, our Western medicine sort of fell
Mhm.
because I had always trusted that as a young child, that the medical community had my best interest at heart.
Yeah.
It just that seemed normal to me. And it wasn't until I had a baby and was going to see a pediatrician that I realized I was getting advice, again, well-meaning advice
Mhm.
that was not really in my best interest. It was a cultural norm, but it wasn't necessarily what was working for me, what was working for my baby. And that little shift, that little paradigm shift started to call into question all of the medical. So not that all medical advice is bad,
Mhm.
please don't get me wrong. I don't mean that at all. But there are times when profit comes before people. And I never knew that before. I mean, this was something that was a revelation to me at the time. And now I am able to see through a different lens to see not everything is as it seems. So that was a one big pillar to fall. And then institutional religion was a little bit of a pillar for me to, again, not all institutional religion is bad, but there are times when the institution itself is more important to people than the message or the people themselves that are in it. So that was another sort of pillar to fall because I wanted a more direct relationship with my creator. And I like that I can have that now. I can choose my own beliefs. It's a choose your own adventure story. I can choose the beliefs that I want to keep, and I can let go of the ones that don't serve me. So it's a very, there's a very conscious choice on my part for that. And then the third one was kind of education and stuff, because I was already, those other two pillars had sort of fallen for me. In other words, it's like the curtain had been opened, Dr. Oz had been revealed. And so I now saw things in a different light. And education was in the same way. I realized, gosh, education as we know it isn't really how people learn. You know, and we know this. We know that the best learning happens in a place where you're able to fail.
Mhm.
And you're able to fail as often as you need to in order to gain the skill. But most of our conventional educational are not places where you want to fail. You're either punished for failing, you're shamed for failing, and
Mhm.
so when you stop failing, you stop learning.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So we know this isn't
Yeah.
new information.
And it makes sense too that a child, they would be feeling so much if they did fail in the conventional sense, because you're talking about failing in a completely different way, right? It's just like the way you're talking about it is like, this is life. We all fail. And we all have our strengths, and then we all have our areas of challenges, and what are they for you, and how do we get through that? But I feel like sometimes in some institutions, and it can be across all three that you named, there can be, based on what happens to us, or our choices, we can have overlays of shame because it just takes away what we really know. And then we're being told we don't know. And yeah, I related to you when we had about the medical, because I too hold Western and alternative complementary, both, gently in both hands. And, um, through my journey, there's been things told to me that are not resonant. And it's a retraining I've had to do to trust myself. And that was a theme, I think, when I started reading the book. It was, maybe you said it, but it was in trust in the journey. And that just seemed like a big theme of the book and your
Yes,
journey.
very much
And
so.
yep.
Very much so.
And like I hear you saying, it's just like the unfolding, the unraveling, the willingness, the curiosity. Um, yeah, I liked it's kind of going back, but I had written down because it was a John Holt quote that you use in the part one of your book, but it said, trust children. Nothing could be more simple or more difficult. Difficult because to trust children, we must first learn to trust ourselves. And most of us were taught as children that we could not be trusted. And therein lies the work I do with coaching, is that everything, and this is the part I like when you talk about self-care and you went into that part of the book, is that or what was being brought up for you to heal in the process of unschooling, really. And but just this idea, most of us were taught as children that we could not be trusted. So again, we are taken away from our truth, our intuition, our knowing, which is, I know it's a cornerstone of unschooling. Like, we want these kids to hold on to this as much as possible. But did you see that in yourself? Or I know you did, but like in the book, talk about what you learned about yourself and what you had to shed from your early days.
Oh, so much. Yes, so much. And I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier, the relationship one.
Mhm.
I can't remember their names, but they
Yeah.
did such a nice job of talking about it. And he was talking about uh, trigger points that came up. I think for him, it was maybe his son screaming that kind of triggered him. And then he
Mhm.
had to realize through some therapy that, oh, that was a trigger because of something that happened or didn't happen for me in my childhood. And now that I know that, I can deal better with that, right? So it was a wound for him that he needed to heal. And I, all through the time of unschooling my kids and being with them in this very, natural, sort of very authentic way, I was constantly meeting up with trigger points that needed to be worked out. And so I'm not saying I was great at it, and there were a lot of things that I still haven't worked out, but they were coming up for me, and our situation really forced me, at least this is how it felt to me, to look at those and deal with those in a way, because I was, it's kind of like because I was wanting to be very authentic to my kids, I was very naked emotionally in front of them. They were seeing everything. So I couldn't hide. And I didn't want to hide, because I realized that everything that I worked through was benefiting them as well as it was benefiting me. So I used to tell people that are on this unschooling journey, that have started down this journey, and they get it. The work is not on your children. The work is on you.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that you are doing just automatically falls into a benefit for your kids. So the work, that's what I felt, is that the unschooling work is really very personal. And it was, it was hard, but it was also very fulfilling. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's like I appreciate the transparency and vulnerability, and ties to Leslie and Juan's episode, because that was such a nugget that he was talking about, that is a life principle and guide, but that you had awareness that you were showing up in certain emotions and in all ways, like, and maybe at first thought, well, this is good. It's got to be good because they can see it all. And we all have the range of emotions as humans. And then figuring like, oh, but maybe I need to do more work underneath that. And but I do love that portion of, so often, because so many homes of our origins, we, of course, we're coming from parents who my grandfather was in the depression, they didn't have food. But all the suppression that comes down, all the misplaced emotions and the, not expressed. And it's just all like that continuum of all of our lives of how do we get to the most healing and healthiest expression of ourselves.
Right.
Hmm.
It's a lot of honesty. And I want to make a point that this honesty, you mentioned earlier that this book could be for somebody that really isn't even interested in homeschooling or unschooling. And one of the things that I've been asked is, what would I have to say to somebody that can't do that or doesn't want to do that? And there is something really important that parents can do. And I know you'll know this from conscious parenting,
Hmm.
is to be honest with your children. Because even if you're having to send your child to school and maybe they're not all that happy with school, if you're at least honest and say, well, the reason I'm sending you to school is because I have to work and I don't have any other place for you to go, and I can't, or I'm not able yet to do unschooling. I don't have the capacity for that right now. I don't have the bandwidth for it right now. And so therefore I need you to be in this place, but understand that I love you more than the grades you're making, or, so just being honest. Suddenly the child says, oh, that child knows when you're being really honest with them or not. I mean, they're totally, they got the radar down.
Yeah.
And so when they hear that you're really being honest and authentic, oh my goodness, the relationship goes to a whole new level of credibility. Your credibility is intact. So being honest, and you can start that at any time, even if you've not been honest before, if you've not been honest with yourself and therefore you've not been honest with them, every little onion layer that you peel off is a help. Every little change is a step forward.
I appreciate
And
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Because I think that, the whole conversation is, or a lot of our conversation today is how do we put down our fears and what are we afraid of? And, I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said there. And if we are transparent with our children and if we show up, in our emotions, or even, I'm pretty transparent about, I don't like this particular part of what's going on or this kind of thing. And I think my partner will be more like, Maureen, you shouldn't say that, because the fear is if I say that, then the child's going to say, oh, well then heck, I'm not, I'm leaving. If mom thinks that, then I'm not studying for that test or whatever it is. But that's not really what's happening beneath the surface. What's happening is your child finds you relatable. They think like, oh, my parent understands me. She gets what I'm going through. She's seeing that this is hard for me. I really think that that's true. And that's all our kids are really looking for, is that
yes,
relatability.
right.
Hmm.
They so thrive on authenticity,
Yeah.
and they need us to lead the way on that. And that also kind of comes back to another really important thing that my husband and I were it was a big underlinement of our parenting, is personal responsibility.
Hmm.
So when you're authentic with your child, you're taking personal responsibility for your emotions.
Yeah.
And why, and the fact that you feel them, and you don't need to apologize for the fact. Again, you're showing the way by being honest with yourself, by opening up and understanding, like, again, when there's a trigger,
Hmm.
saying to yourself, gosh, why do I have a fear there? What's behind that fear? What's behind that feeling? What's behind that clench that I feel in my stomach? And go back into that and delve in and say, where did that come from? And is that true? Or is it, because it may not be true anymore.
Hmm.
Maybe it was
Hmm.
true once
Hmm.
upon a time and it's not true anymore. And then you can go, oh, I can let that go again, or I can overcome that fear. And so, yeah, taking personal responsibility is very important as the parent, because you're teaching your children that's what
Yeah.
you should do.
Hmm.
You need to
Hmm.
take personal responsibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that personal responsibility. And, the word that before we started recording today is just giving yourself permission, because I have had to give myself permission. around one of my children's school experience. And, a spiritual teacher of mine had pointed out at one time, and it's just like going to a doctor and speaking your truth, but she did, it was very supportive of me because she was able to say, Maureen, this is a really big deal, speaking up to the institution, because it's not like a conscious belief that we don't want to hear from parents, but that it's running underneath the system somewhere of like, we've got a time clock and these meetings are X amount, 20 minutes. And, so I have to take that responsibility. I have to go into myself and, really stand up for my child and my belief systems. So it's kind of like we're working symbiotically. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Mhm.
it's knowing that, even for people who choose traditional conventional school, use your voice, give yourself permission, because if you intuitively know something is right for your child and you're getting internal information that that's true, don't quiet your voice. Keep on going forward and expressing yourself, because we're teaching our kids this and we want them to be able to experience it. An example would be, I think even, I was something around advocating for yourself. And then like, I think I'm thinking of my son, and like, then over the years, he's gaining the confidence and the ability to advocate for himself, only to be told no when he did it,
Mm.
And so it's like, wait a minute, if that doesn't feel right, let's go back and just have the conversation. It doesn't have to be, I think another way we were all, like, a lot of us were raised was that communication was confrontation, or I will own that for myself, that it felt like if I had something to say, like it was this big thing. And it's like, no, let's all retrain ourselves that it's just a conversation. It's just a conversation. And so your nervous system doesn't have to go crazy. You don't have to think fear is on the other side, something bad's going to happen. But yeah, I'm going off here. But
No, that's
you,
true. That's
Mhm.
true.
Yeah.
And I think there was something that you said about uh, I've lost it. Uh, I know, like when you're speaking up for your child, one thing that might be helpful, and this was something that I used to kind of keep in the back of my mind, is, what if you were Einstein's mother, or Edison's mother, or Steve Jobs' mother, or Beethoven's mother, and everybody's pressuring you to have your kid be the same as everybody else, you know, but they're not the same as everybody else, and no kid is the same as everybody else. So that's why I say, like, I truly believe that every child is a genius. And
Mhm.
the reason I mean, maybe I use that word in ways that other people really don't like, but to me, every unique individual is so important to our cosmos. And it's so important that that unique individual is allowed to express in their unique way. So if you're going to advocate for your child, try to think of it in terms of, not that they're all not like a snowflake. I mean, not that everybody's, too delicate to do, but that everybody is unique, and that it's important that everybody's able to express that.
Mhm.
So maybe that would help for a mom
Yeah.
or a dad that
Mhm.
needs to advocate for their child and feels nervous about that. It's hard to do that in an institution, because the institution is not set up for that. It's just
Yeah.
the nature of an institution. That's
Mhm.
how, that's
Mhm.
why that's really why I wanted out of that institution, because I wanted the freedom to be able to move
Yeah.
and do.
That was also well said. Thanks for sharing that beautiful wisdom with the listeners. We haven't even talked about your kids. I know we're nearing the end, but your kids are, I think, in their older 20s now, and they were homeschooled from birth to 18 and went on to college educations, which
Yes.
might be something that people don't know does happen. And you can have this non-traditional approach to education and still make that choice when you come to college age.
Right. If that's what you want.
Yeah.
College isn't for everybody, but
Hmm.
yes, absolutely. And in fact, a lot of colleges love to have homeschoolers. because those kids come in, they're not burned out.
Mhm.
They're not already fried from testing and everything that they've done. And they're still very eager to learn. I mean, I know my daughter, well, both of my kids went into their classes really engaged, because that's how they'd always been engaged in learning with other teachers or with other kids. You know, when we did classes, ad hoc little classes, they were always excited about learning. Learning hadn't been given a bad name for them.
Yeah.
The way it does for some kids. You know, you say something to a conventional kid about, oh, we're going to do this educational thing. They're being like, I don't want any part of it, because education and learning has been given a really bad name for them. It's distasteful, because they know it's been kind of pressed down on them. Whereas my kids never had that association. So learning and educational just seem like, oh, interesting. Right. And they're both still super engaged in learning and of all kinds of interesting things. They're very enthusiastic learners.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
It didn't get shut down, which I love.
I know there's so much more that I'd want to ask around that, but I think the touch points for me during our interview were, your journey as a mom, as a woman going through these new choices and new directions, a new path in your life, trusting, shedding, letting go of what no longer served, and creating this space, and also seeing children as a whole and humanity as individual, unique, creative, abundant, like all these things that we want for them all, and not for them to feel limited or told they are something that they never even were, they didn't give permission to be called something or limited in that way. And so I think there's so many beautiful themes. If people are interested in finding your work, where should they go, Jean?
So my website is called successwithoutschool.com.
Okay.
I also am on Facebook, Success Without School, and on Instagram, Success Without School. Okay. I also have a Facebook page called trustyourchild.com. In fact, trustyourchild.com will get you to my webpage as well. Okay. They both do. And there's some blog entries there that I've written that will help people, I think, get a little bit more of a view, besides the book, of course. So the book's available as an audio book, an ebook, or paperback at all your normal book selling options.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your story, your experience. It's just a beginning. And I'm so happy to have you here as part of our sisterhood.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much.
Yes. We'll put everything you shared in the show notes. And to the listeners, we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit MaureenSpielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.